Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the scariest thing you saw whilst on the inside? Not me, but my husband was in prison as a young adult. He said that they had a way of checking your ego in the spot he was at. The toughest guys would come up to you on your first day and ask how many push-ups you could do. If you were smart, you would just sort of blow it off, or laugh it off and move on. If you were a stupid show-off, or had something to prove, you would claim a large number, or talk yourself up. If you did that, then they would be all friendly and be like, oh, let's see it. So the poor guy would do as many push-ups as they could. The tough guys would gas the new guy up, acting friendly, pushing him to do more. They acted impressed and joked around. Then as soon as the new guy had done as many push-ups as possible, they would jump him and beat him up. He would be helpless to resist because he had maximumed himself out on push-ups. Afterwards, any guy with an ego was normally really quiet for the remainder of their stay. I did a couple years when I was young and dumb. The craziest I saw was actually in the county jail and not the state prison. The county jail was right on the Texas/Mexico border, so there were a lot of Hispanics. What was weird was the Hispanics born in America and the Mexicans from Mexico absolutely hated each other. I saw a Hispanic from Texas heat up a bowl of water until it was boiling in the microwave. We had microwaves in the tank, and he then proceeded to throw the boiling water on a Mexican from Mexico's face and then beat the ever-loving shit out of him. That dude's screams will haunt me forever. I also saw a guy take a blade from a small pencil sharpener, tie it to a toothbrush, and then slice a guy's face from ear to ear while he was sleeping. The guy lived, but it looked like a fucking murder scene. Where I was, the guard towers were armed with a variety of less than lethal firearms. A fight started on the breezeway, main walkway between units. You hear the siren, and you have about 10 seconds sit on your ass and cover your head to protect from over spray. Else, the guards start shooting shotguns loaded with rubber balls at you. One of the guards hit one of the guys fighting directly in the sack with a rubber ball round. Turned the front of his jeans red by the time they got him up and to the infirmary. Apparently lost a testicle due to rupture. Not a prisoner, but an ex-guard. I worked at a juvenile detention facility in New Mexico. The absolute scariest thing I ever saw was a young boy, 9 years old, booked in for murdering both of his parents. There was nothing there. I failed to call this thing even human. I looked into this child's eyes and felt more fear than I ever have to this day. This was no child, it was a monster. Pure evil, condensed and given human form. And to clarify, I have booked and looked after murder suspects before. It was nothing new. But this kid was different. Very different. He never broke any rules and always followed commands, but never ever spoke unless directly asked something. And then it was curt, short, just to answer a question. He never cried either, which is highly unusual for a 9-year-old kid in jail. He was eventually tried and transferred to mental facility, but I'll never forget the kid's eyes. It haunts me to this day. A friend of mine did a short stint. From what he told me, he was supposed to get paperwork detailing his charges before he got to prison, but did not. This made the other prisoners suspicious as they believed he was a snitch, was trying to hide that fact from them, and they threatened to beat him. An old acquaintance of his was in there and assured my friend that he had nothing to worry about as they had been threatening him for months and nothing had happened. That night while my friend was making his bed, a few prisoners ran into his acquaintance's cell and beat him to within inches of his life. They were bouncing the guy's head off of the concrete to the point that my friend could hear it. My buddy says that's the moment that scared him straight. Not a prisoner, but a former correctional officer. Saw a dude detoxing from alcohol die. Responded to a maintenance worker stabbing another inmate in the head with a screwdriver, and was involved in containing a riot. Obligatory, not a prisoner, but an ex-correctional officer. I once had to work overtime in a segregation unit. The first thing that happens upon entering this unit is we get a call that an inmate who was out on a medical trip was coming back in and was to be placed into a suicide watch cell. This inmate had been taken to an outside hospital for cutting his arm from his wrist to his bicep. We placed him in the suicide watch cell and went to find a bed mat for him, which was hard cause he couldn't have one with a hole in it while being on suicide watch. He told me that if I didn't get him a bed mat in 5 minutes, he was going to start ripping stitches. I told him to wait, went to find the mat, and it had apparently been 6 minutes, cause by the time I got back, he had torn off his bandages and ripped out every single stitch in his arm. The blood was all over the place. We could easily see the muscle and fat in his arm. He agreed to cuff up and went on his merry way back to the outside hospital. I later found out he had only initially done it cause he wanted to get out of prison for a while. That fact alone messed me up. Prison officer here. If any of the ex-cons are reading this, they may get a laugh out of it. I was working in a high security at risk unit where we housed prisoners with suicidal tendencies. One prisoner in particular liked to fill his mouth with his piss and spit it on you through the gaps in the doors. One day I forgot to walk wide of his cell and all of a sudden, bam, he hit the inside of the door with the palm of his hand. It gave me a jolt and I've been an officer for 13 years. When I turned towards his cell I yelled as loud as I could. He got a fright and swallowed pretty much all he had in his mouth. Within seconds, there was projectile vomiting from the prisoner. The fucked up part was that we had to clean the cell as the prisoner was taken to medical for obs. But vomit. It was bad. It's a tough job sometimes. I was in a min I saw some brutal fights. But the worst thing I ever witnessed was from some idiots. They stole some isopropyl alcohol from the med unit somehow, brought it back, mixed it into drinks and drank it. They were throwing up worse than I've ever seen, and down 4-eyed sick as fuck, screaming in agony, shriveled in a ball on the floor. I've heard of people drinking floor stripper for GHB or something. But the things people will do to try and get fucked up is way beyond anything I can comprehend. Also a bonus answer for you. The worst, scariest, most painful thing I've ever dealt with. I got scabies and had it for 11 months. I was treated several times for it, but because people were infected around me, I kept getting it. If you have never had it or even heard of it, be thankful. I have scars on my body from scratching because of how itchy and uncomfortable I was. I finally had to threaten a hunger strike. You want them to listen in prison? Go to medical, ask them for the lieutenant, and say you are going on a hunger strike. They treated me last time and put me on a psych hold in isolation for 3 days. When I got out they transferred me to a new housing unit and I never got it again. I was taking a shower in a communal shower. This guy walks in and is immediately jumped by 4 dudes. One guy takes out the metal strip to a safety razor and proceeds to cut this dude's fucking ear off. Good times lol. Not me, but a teacher of mine told me a story of one of her students that spent a week in juvie. He wasn't there for more than 2 days when a gang of boys attacked him, sliced his back up with razors and raped him. No one knew until they came to release him, and his mom put a hand on his back, only to hear him scream in pain because of all the cuts on his back. I spent a day in country jail, the same jail where a family member worked at for a while as a lieutenant. It was his retirement job, meaning easy work. When you get into country they give you a wristband with your full name and a barcode on it. For that 20-something hours I did everything I could to try to hide my last name, because it is very distinctive and the same as my family member. My uncle spent time in and out of prison for most of my life. Not a bad guy, just makes terrible decisions. He told me once that his entire pod went into lockdown and the guy in his cell started to have epileptic seizures due to the stress. I guess this guy had a history of crying wolf and guards were in no rush to assist him. He ended up choking on his vomit and dying in the cell with my uncle watching. Guy laid on the floor for an entire night before anyone came in to check. I saw a guy keep scratching his arm until it bled. Then he took Tyrion and put it inside the wound because he didn't have a needle. It was completely f***ed. He was doing it in the courtyard under the camera so the camera couldn't see him. I hope never to see anything that like it seemed like he would do anything to get that Tyrion into his bloodstream. Early 90s. My dad was a prison sergeant when I was a small kid. I remember a long period of time where he was not allowed to kiss us or be close with my mom, sister and I found out years later it was because an inmate who was HIV plus intentionally cut himself and tried to infect nearby officers during a fuss. They practiced extreme caution while my dad was getting checked every few months to make sure he didn't contract the disease. Fortunately he was not infected. Not an inmate, but current correctional officer. Once I was speaking to an inmate who was accused and later found guilty of killing 5 women. He stared at me straight in the eyes and said that's what the police found. Haunting. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Let us know your thoughts on this topic. See you soon.